The small velvet box sat unopened on our dining room table, a bottle of expensive champagne chilling nearby. I had spent the afternoon preparing Daniel's favorite meal, filet mignon with truffle butter, roasted asparagus, and the chocolate soufflé that had impressed him on our first date 7 years ago. Our wedding photo smiled at me from the mantel as I arranged white roses in a crystal vase, my final touch for our anniversary dinner. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That's when I heard it, Daniel's voice drifting from his home office, the door slightly ajar. He thought I was out picking up dessert wine, but I'd returned early, eager to perfect every detail of our celebration. "Mark, it's all arranged," Daniel said, his tone hushed but unmistakably excited. "She doesn't suspect a thing. The papers are ready. I'm filing for divorce next week after the Anderson merger closes." I froze in the hallway, the bottle of Sauternes clutched in my hand. "The timing couldn't be better," he continued. "Emma's little bakery is just a hobby. The prenup limits her to that and whatever salary she's paid. Meanwhile, my bonus from this merger will be 7 figures minimum, and she won't see a penny of it." A laugh echoed through the crack in the door. "I know, right? She's been so caught up in her cupcake dreams she hasn't noticed me moving assets offshore. Poor thing still thinks we're celebrating our anniversary tonight." The bottle nearly slipped from my fingers as his words punctured my heart. 7 years of marriage, reduced to poor thing and cupcake dreams. Yes, Vanessa's waiting at the condo. Just one more week of playing the devoted husband, then freedom. Vanessa, his 28-year-old assistant. The one he'd insisted was just efficient when I mentioned how often she called after hours. I slipped silently back to the kitchen, my mind racing faster than my heart. The soufflé in the oven suddenly seemed ridiculous, a perfect metaphor for our marriage. A fragile creation I'd been carefully tending while Daniel had been planning its collapse. But I was not the naive wife he described to his friend. My little bakery had started in our kitchen 3 years ago when I left my marketing executive position. Sweet Creations had grown from weekend farmers market sales to a thriving business with corporate clients and wedding orders booked months in advance. The storefront I'd opened last year in downtown Riverside wasn't just surviving, it was flourishing. Daniel had always treated my business as a charming diversion, something to keep me occupied while he handled real work. He'd smile indulgently when I mentioned revenue growth or new client acquisitions, patting my hand like one might praise a child for a finger painting. "That's great, honey," he'd say, "as long as it makes you happy." Then he'd immediately pivot to his latest triumph at Stanton Financial, effectively dismissing my achievement. I placed the wine bottle on the counter and checked the soufflé with mechanical precision. It had risen perfectly, unaware its intended audience had just shattered my world. 7 years together, and I'd never truly seen the man I married. Or, rather, I'd ignored the signs, believing love would transform his occasional condescension into respect. As I removed the soufflé from the oven, a strange calm settled over me. The initial shock crystallized into something colder, more focused. Daniel had calculated everything, except the possibility that I might discover his betrayal before he was ready to reveal it. I took out my phone and called Megan, my business partner and closest friend. "Hey, what's up? Shouldn't you be having romantic anniversary time?" she answered. "Plans have changed," I said, keeping my voice low. "I need you to meet me at the shop tomorrow morning, early, and bring that contract lawyer friend of yours." "Emma, what's happening?" Concern edged her voice. "I'll explain everything tomorrow. Just trust me." After hanging up, I opened my laptop at the kitchen island and navigated to our online banking portal. Daniel had been methodical. I'd give him that. Small transfers over months, nothing immediately suspicious. But now that I was looking specifically for evidence, I could see the pattern. Our joint accounts had been slowly draining while his personal accounts remained untouched. I downloaded 3 years of statements and forwarded them to my email, then printed copies for good measure. Next, I logged into our investment portfolio, the one Daniel had insisted on managing himself. Sure enough, several positions had been liquidated recently, with the funds transferred to accounts I didn't recognize. All these years, I'd trusted him implicitly with our finances. After all, he was the investment banker with an MBA from Wharton. What did I know about complex financial management? That had been his view, carefully cultivated and reinforced throughout our marriage. And I had accepted it. Until now. I heard his office door open, followed by the sound of his Italian leather, shoes on the hardwood floor. I closed the laptop just as he entered the kitchen, his practiced smile sliding into place. "Something smells amazing," Daniel said, approaching to kiss my cheek. At 42, he remained as handsome as the day we met, salt and pepper. Hair perfectly styled, his tailored shirt emphasizing broad shoulders that tapered to a trim waist. The consummate finance executive, polished and precise. I smiled back, surprised by how easily the expression came. "Happy anniversary. Dinner's almost ready." "Let me change quickly," he said, loosening his tie. "I brought you something special." He patted his jacket pocket with a wink. As he disappeared upstairs, I wondered what the something special might be. A parting gift before he detonated our marriage? A piece of jewelry to ease his conscience? I set the table as I had planned, lit the candles, and poured the champagne. This evening would proceed, but not as either of us had anticipated. Daniel returned wearing the cashmere sweater I'd given him last Christmas, holding a small gift box. 7 years, he said, raising his champagne glass. To many more. The blatant lie should have made me flinch, but instead, it fortified my resolve. I clinked my glass against his. To getting exactly what we deserve. He didn't notice the edge in my voice, too pleased with his performance as devoted husband. We ate dinner with Daniel sharing anecdotes about his day, careful to seem interested in my responses. I played along, asking about the Anderson merger, the very deal that would trigger my disposal. "It's coming along nicely," he said, cutting into his steak. "Should close next week if all goes well." "That's wonderful," I replied. "It sounds like perfect timing." He glanced up, but I kept my expression neutral. Yes, the timing couldn't be better. After dinner, he presented me with his gift, a diamond tennis bracelet that must have cost thousands. I accepted it with appropriate gratitude, noting he'd left the price tag in the box. Typical Daniel, ensuring I knew the exact value of his generosity. "It's beautiful," I said, fastening it around my wrist. "My gift for you is actually still in progress. I wanted it to be perfect." "No rush," he replied magnanimously. "You can give it to me anytime." If only he knew how true that statement was. Later that night, as Daniel slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, mentally cataloging every asset we shared, every account I had access to, every client whose business I'd helped him secure through the dinner parties and charity events I'd organized. I thought about the prenuptial agreement I'd signed without much scrutiny, a document that now stood between me and financial security. But Daniel had made a critical error in his assessment of me and my business. He still thought of sweet creations as my hobby, unaware that in the past year, my little bakery had secured contracts with 4 high-end restaurants in Connecticut, expanded to a staff of 6, and was currently negotiating with Harborview Hotels to provide signature desserts for their East Coast properties. He didn't know, because he never asked, and I'd stopped telling. Somewhere along the way, I'd internalized his dismissal of my work and stopped sharing my successes, tired of having them minimized or overlooked. That ended now. At 5:30 a.m., while Daniel still slept, I slipped out of bed and dressed quietly. I gathered my laptop, the financial documents I'd printed, and a few personal items that couldn't be replaced. My grandmother's locket, photos from before I met Daniel, the handwritten recipes that had launched Sweet Creations. I left my anniversary bracelet on the dresser with a note. I'd prefer something more honest. Enjoy your freedom with Vanessa. By 6:15 a.m., I was at the bakery. The pre-dawn hours had always been my favorite. The quiet productivity, the yeasty warmth, the promise of creation. Today, that familiar comfort was tinged with determination and a strange exhilaration. For the first time in years, I was fully awake. Megan arrived at 7 a.m., confusion written across her face. Close behind her was Jennifer Walsh, a contract attorney who had helped us with our business incorporation. "Emma, you're scaring me," Megan said, setting down coffee for all. 3 of us. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath and told them everything. Daniel's phone call, the offshore accounts, the prenup that would leave me with next to nothing, and the girlfriend waiting in the wings. "That calculating bastard," Megan whispered when I finished. Jennifer was already flipping through the financial documents I'd printed. "He's been methodical, but not as clever as he thinks." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. These transfers create a clear pattern of intent to hide marital assets. That's explicitly against the law. "The prenup limits what I can claim of his assets and earnings," I reminded her. "Prenups aren't bulletproof, especially when there's evidence of fraud," Jennifer replied. "And there's something else to consider. Your business has significantly increased in value since you signed that agreement. He may be underestimating its worth and your claim to the marital assets that supported its growth." For the next 2 hours, we outlined a strategy. First, securing new legal representation specializing in high-conflict divorces. Second, documenting every aspect of Sweet Creations' growth and valuation. Third, gathering evidence of Daniel's asset concealment. "What about the Harborview contract?" Megan asked. "Should we put that on hold given everything that's happening?" I considered this for a moment. The contract with Harborview Hotels would triple our production and require significant expansion. I'd been hesitant to take the leap, planning to discuss it with Daniel first, a courtesy he clearly hadn't extended to me regarding our marriage. "No," I decided. "In fact, we accelerate. Call them today and tell them we accept their terms. Then contact the realtor about that production space on Maple Street." Megan's eyebrows shot up. "That's 4,000 square feet, Emma. It's a massive investment." "It's exactly what we need," I replied, certainty settling into my bones. And it's time I stopped thinking small. As my team arrived to begin the day's baking, I retreated to my small office in the back of the shop. My phone showed 7 missed calls from Daniel. He would have found my note by now, the carefully curated mask of devoted husband slipping as he realized his plan had been discovered. I texted him once. "I'll be home at 7 p.m. to discuss. Don't bother denying anything." I heard everything. Then I silenced my phone and turned to the Harborview contract, reviewing every clause and requirement. By noon, I had signed the agreement, committing Sweet Creations to providing custom desserts for all 14 of their East Coast properties. At 2 p.m., I met with the real estate agent to tour the Maple Street space, a former warehouse with soaring ceilings, abundant natural light, and enough room for the expanded production we would need. "It needs work," the agent warned, gesturing to the outdated electrical systems and worn floors. "It's perfect," I said, already envisioning the layout. Production lines there, packaging area there, a small retail space in front with a demonstration, kitchen for classes and events. I signed a letter of intent on the spot, using funds from Sweet Creations' business account, an account Daniel knew existed but had never bothered to inquire about. He assumed it contained the modest profits of a hobby business, unaware that I had been reinvesting every penny of our growing revenue instead of drawing a large salary. By 4 p.m., I had met with a divorce attorney recommended by Jennifer, Catherine Moore, Known for her ruthless efficiency in high-conflict cases, she reviewed my documents with clinical precision. "Your husband made some elementary mistakes," she noted. "Overconfidence can be useful to us. I suggest we move quickly before he has time to cover his tracks more effectively." She outlined an aggressive strategy: filing for divorce immediately, freezing joint assets, documenting the concealed transfers, and demanding full financial disclosure under penalty of perjury. "What about the prenup?" I asked. "We'll challenge it on grounds of fraud and material change in circumstances," she replied. "The growth of your business, his deliberate concealment of assets, these create openings. It won't be easy, but he's not as protected as he thinks." At 7 p.m. exactly, I walked into our house. Daniel was waiting in the living room, his expression a carefully controlled mask of concern. "Emma, what is going on?" he asked, rising from the sofa. "Your note was—" "Please don't insult me with denial," I interrupted, setting my purse on the coffee table. "I heard your entire conversation with Mark yesterday. The divorce plans, Vanessa waiting at the condo, the offshore accounts, all of it." His face tightened, calculations visibly running behind his eyes. I could almost see him weighing options, deciding which version of events would best serve his interests. "I admit, I've been considering divorce," he finally said, his tone measured. "Our marriage hasn't been fulfilling for either of us for some time, but I never intended to blindside you. I was waiting for the right moment to discuss it maturely." "After the Anderson merger closed," I supplied, "when your bonus was safely deposited somewhere I couldn't access it." He had the decency to flush slightly. "You're making it sound calculated." "That's because it was." I took a seat in the armchair across from him, feeling strangely calm. "Let's be honest with each other just this once. You've been planning your exit for months, moving assets, preparing to leave me with as little as possible while you start fresh with Vanessa." Daniel's expression hardened. "The prenup is clear about what you're entitled to. Your bakery, your personal possessions, and that's essentially it. Everything else we've built has come from my earnings." "That's not entirely accurate," I replied, "and I think you know that. My name is on the house deed. I've contributed to our lifestyle in countless ways, and I have records of every suspicious transfer you've made in the past 6 months. His eyes narrowed. "You've been investigating me?" "I've been protecting myself," I corrected, "something I should have been doing for years." "This doesn't have to be adversarial, Emma," Daniel said, shifting to the conciliatory tone he used with difficult clients. "We can reach a reasonable settlement without involving attorneys or the courts." "I've already retained counsel," I informed him. "Catherine Moore. You might know her reputation." The flash of recognition in his eyes confirmed he did indeed know her name. His jaw tightened. "That's unnecessary and expensive," he said. "We could have handled this privately." "The way you were handling it privately? By cleaning out our accounts before I noticed?" I shook my head. "I'm filing for divorce first thing tomorrow morning. The papers will request an immediate freeze on all joint assets pending full financial disclosure." Daniel's careful composure finally cracked. "You're overreacting, and frankly, you're out of your depth. This isn't like planning a menu or decorating a cake, Emma. This is complex legal and financial territory." There it was, the condescension that had colored our entire relationship. Even now, facing the consequences of his actions, he couldn't help but diminish me. "I think you'll find I'm more capable than you've given me credit for," I said, rising from my seat. "By the way, I signed the Harborview Hotel's contract today. Sweet Creations will be providing signature desserts for all their East Coast properties, starting next month." Confusion flickered across his face. "Harborview? The luxury hotel chain?" "The very same. We're also leasing a 4,000 square foot production facility to accommodate the expansion. I signed the letter of intent this afternoon." For the first time, Daniel looked truly caught off guard. The careful mask of control slipped, revealing genuine surprise as he processed the scale of what I was describing. This wasn't the hobby business he'd dismissed for years. This was serious expansion with a prestigious client. "You can't make decisions that large without consulting me," he finally said, his attorney voice emerging. "As your spouse, I have a right to what? The fruits of my labor? The business you've repeatedly trivialized?" I smiled thinly. "You should review the operating agreement for Sweet Creations. It's registered as a separate LLC with me as the sole proprietor. Your name doesn't appear anywhere." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "I provided the seed capital. $10,000 as a birthday gift 3 years ago," I clarified, "which I've documented as a gift, not an investment, including the card where you wrote, 'For your little cupcake dream, no strings attached.' Everything since has come from revenue, loans in my name, and my personal savings from before our marriage." His face darkened. "You've been planning this." "No, Daniel. I've been building something. You've been planning deception." I picked up my purse, ready to leave. "I'll be staying with Megan until this is resolved. I suggest you use this time to consider a fair settlement. Catherine will be in touch tomorrow." "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded, standing to block my path to the door. "We're in the middle of a discussion." "We're at the end of a marriage," I corrected, "and I have an early morning tomorrow. Expanding businesses require attention." "You won't get away with this," he said, his voice low. "You signed the prenup. I've protected my assets. You think your little bakery makes you untouchable. I have connections you can't imagine. One word from me, and doors will close all over this town." I looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. The handsome face that had once made my heart race now appeared hard and cold. The mask of civility completely dropped to reveal the calculation beneath. "You never really saw me, did you?" I said quietly. "All these years, you never actually saw what I'm capable of. That was your first mistake." I stepped around him and walked to the door, turning back one last time. "Oh, and Daniel? The prenup has a morality clause. Section 4, paragraph 3, infidelity creates grounds for it to be invalidated. You might want to refresh your memory." The flash of alarm in his eyes confirmed he'd forgotten that detail, a clause his own lawyer had insisted on, ironically to protect him should I stray. I hadn't even considered it important until Jennifer pointed it out during our review that morning. Before he could respond, I walked out, closing the door firmly behind me. In my car, parked in the driveway of what had been our shared home, I finally allowed myself a deep, shuddering breath. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the steering wheel, the adrenaline of confrontation finally ebbing to leave room for the enormity of what lay ahead. My phone buzzed with a text from Megan. "Guest room ready. Wine uncorked. Whenever you're ready." 20 minutes later, I was sitting on Megan's sofa, a glass of Cabernet in my hand, as I recounted the conversation with Daniel. "The look on his face when you mentioned Harborview," she said, shaking her head with grim satisfaction. "I wish I could have seen it. It felt..." I searched for the right word. "Clarifying, like finally stepping into the light after years in shadow." "He underestimated you," Megan said. "Men like Daniel always do." "I underestimated myself," I admitted. "I let him convince me that his work was important and mine was cute. I accepted his framework for our entire relationship. Well, that framework is officially shattered," she said, refilling my glass. "The question is, what happens next?" What happened next unfolded with the precision of a well-crafted recipe. The following morning, Catherine filed the divorce petition, requesting an emergency hearing regarding the dissipation of marital assets. By afternoon, the court had issued a temporary restraining order preventing Daniel from accessing several of our joint accounts pending full financial disclosure. Daniel's response was swift and furious. He called 17 times, each voicemail more threatening than the last. His attorney, a sharp-featured man named Richard Geller from his firm's legal department, sent a formal letter demanding I cease malicious actions designed to damage Mr. Reynolds's financial standing. I forwarded the letter to Catherine, who responded with a detailed accounting of Daniel's suspicious transfers and a counter-demand for complete financial transparency, including records of all accounts opened in the past 5 years. Meanwhile, I threw myself into Sweet Creations' expansion with single-minded focus. The Maple Street property needed significant renovation to accommodate our production needs. Contractors were hired, equipment ordered, and additional staff interviewed. The sheer scale of activity left little time for dwelling on my crumbling marriage. 3 days after moving to Megan's, I received an email from Robert Harrington, CEO of Harborview Hotels, who had personally overseen our contract negotiations. "Emma, I received a concerning call from someone claiming to be your husband," the email began. "He suggested your business might be unable to fulfill our contract due to personal and financial instability. I wanted to check directly with you before taking his comments under advisement. The blatant attempt to sabotage my biggest contract ignited a cold fury I hadn't known I possessed." I immediately called Robert, explaining the situation with calm professionalism. "I'm in the midst of divorce proceedings from someone who apparently feels threatened by my success," I told him. "Sweet Creations is on solid financial footing, as our records demonstrate. The expansion is proceeding on schedule, and your contract remains our top priority." Robert, thankfully, was more amused than concerned. "I suspected something like that," he said. "The gentleman seemed more interested in undermining you than expressing genuine concerns about capacity. Rest assured, our agreement stands." After hanging up, I forwarded the email to Catherine with a brief note. "Documentation of Daniel's attempt to interfere with my business relationships. Please add to the file." Her response was immediate. "This helps us. Keep records of any similar incidents." The next day, similar calls went out to our other major clients. Most reached out to me directly to verify relationships I'd built over years of reliability and excellence. A few smaller accounts wavered, reluctant to be caught in the crossfire of a contentious divorce. Daniel was systematically attempting to destroy what I'd built, calling in favors from contacts throughout Riverside's business community. A lease I'd been negotiating for a second retail location suddenly fell through. Our application for an expanded line of credit was delayed for additional review. A catering client with ties to Stanton Financial abruptly canceled a major order. Each blow was calculated to weaken my position, force me back to the negotiating table on his terms. What Daniel failed to understand was that each attack only reinforced my resolve. 1 week after filing for divorce, I sat in Catherine's office reviewing our strategy for the first court hearing. "He's playing dirty," she observed, reviewing the growing file of Daniel's interference attempts. "The good news is it's backfiring, legally. The judge assigned to your case doesn't look kindly on this kind of retaliatory behavior." "What about the prenup challenge?" I asked. "Do we have enough to invalidate it?" "We're building a strong case," Catherine replied. "The morality clause is our strongest argument given his affair. The hidden assets strengthen our position, and his active attempts to damage your business further demonstrate bad faith." She leaned forward, fixing me with an evaluating look. "There's something else we should consider. Your business valuation." "What about it?" "Daniel's actions suggest he still doesn't understand Sweet Creations' true worth. We should use that. I've consulted with a forensic accountant who specializes in business valuation for divorce proceedings. She believes your company, especially with the Harborview contract, could be valued significantly higher than Daniel realizes." "How does that help us?" Catherine smiled thinly. "In negotiations, information asymmetry is power. If he's still thinking of your business as a hobby venture worth maybe a few $100,000, while we can demonstrate it's worth millions with projected growth, We have leverage he doesn't know exists. The word millions momentarily took my breath away. Not because it seemed implausible. I had run the projections myself since signing with Harborview, but because hearing it stated so matter-of-factly by someone else made the scale of what I'd built suddenly, viscerally real. Let's proceed with the valuation, I decided, and keep it confidential for now. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal maneuvering and business expansion. The initial court hearing went in our favor, with the judge extending the freeze on joint assets and ordering Daniel to provide complete financial records within 30 days. His attorney argued vehemently against the order, claiming it interfered with legitimate business activities, but the evidence of suspicious transfers was too compelling to dismiss. Daniel's professional facade began showing cracks. Clients at Tuck DT's Stanton Financial started asking questions about his personal issues after his assistant Vanessa abruptly requested transfer to another department. Rumors circulated about his offshore accounts, triggering an internal review by the firm's compliance department. Meanwhile, renovations at the Maple Street property progressed rapidly. The main production area was already taking shape, with new electrical systems installed and specialized equipment scheduled for delivery. I hired 4 additional bakers and a dedicated logistics manager to handle the Harborview account. 3 weeks into our separation, Daniel requested a meeting. Not without counsel present, I told him when he called. This is between us, Emma, he insisted. We should be able to talk without attorneys turning it into a battlefield. You created the battlefield when you decided to drain our accounts and hide assets from me, I replied evenly. Any discussion now happens with Catherine present. He finally agreed to meet at Catherine's office, bringing his attorney Richard with him. Daniel looked less polished than usual, subtle signs of strain visible in the shadows under his eyes and the slight disarray of his typically immaculate appearance. This has gone far enough, he began once we were seated in Catherine's conference room. The freeze on our accounts is affecting my ability to function professionally. My standing at the firm is being compromised. Catherine raised an eyebrow. Perhaps you should have considered that before attempting to conceal marital assets. Richard interjected smoothly. My client acknowledges there may have been some opaque financial maneuvers that created unfortunate impressions. However, these were legitimate tax planning strategies, not attempts to deprive Mrs. Reynolds of her fair share. Tax planning strategies that coincidentally accelerated just before he planned to file for divorce? Catherine countered. That included transfers to accounts in jurisdictions known for banking secrecy? That he never once mentioned to his spouse? Daniel's jaw tightened. I'm prepared to offer a generous settlement to resolve this quickly. The house, a lump sum of $500,000, and I'll withdraw my claims to any part of Sweet Creations. I almost laughed. The amount he considered generous wouldn't cover the equipment already ordered for the Maple Street facility, let alone reflect a fair division of our marital assets. That's not going to work, I said calmly. Daniel leaned forward, his expression hardening. Be reasonable, Emma. You're running a bakery, not a multinational corporation. The prenup is clear about asset division. I'm offering more than I'm required to because I want this resolved amicably. Let me be equally clear, Catherine interjected. We have documented evidence of your client's infidelity, which triggers the morality clause in the prenuptial agreement. We have records of systematic attempts to hide marital assets, and we have multiple instances of Mr. Reynolds actively attempting to sabotage my client's business relationships. She slid a folder across the table. This is our counteroffer. Full financial disclosure of all accounts, domestic and foreign. Fair division of all marital assets acquired during the marriage, and compensatory damages for the documented interference with Sweet Creations' business operations. Richard opened the folder, scanned the contents, and passed it to Daniel, whose face darkened as he read. This is absurd, he finally said. You're asking for nearly everything. I'm asking for what's fair, I corrected, which is distinctly different from what you plan to leave me with. Daniel's eyes met mine, genuine confusion mixing with anger. You can't possibly think your bakery justifies this kind of demand. It's a small business, Emma. A successful one, granted, but hardly the financial cornerstone you're treating it as. In that moment, I understood the fundamental disconnect that had defined our marriage. Daniel truly couldn't conceive of my work as valuable in the way his was, as capable of generating significant wealth, as worthy of respect and protection. Even facing evidence to the contrary, his worldview couldn't accommodate the reality of what I had built. Sweet Creations generated $1.8 million in revenue last year, I said quietly. With the Harborview contract and our expansion, projected revenue for next year is $2 million. Our growth rate has consistently exceeded 60% annually for 3 years running. The silence that followed was profound. Daniel stared at me, disbelief evident in his expression. That's not possible, he finally managed. You would have mentioned numbers like that. I did, initially, I reminded him. You called it cute when I excitedly told you about breaking 6 figures our first year. You changed the subject when I mentioned our first major contract. Eventually, I stopped sharing because you stopped listening. Catherine smoothly picked up the thread. The forensic accountant's valuation of Sweet Creations is included in our proposal. As you'll see, its current market value significantly exceeds what you seem to believe, Mr. Reynolds. Daniel flipped to that section of the document, his face paling slightly as he read. This can't be accurate, he muttered, more to himself than to us. I assure you it is, Catherine replied. Multiple valuation methods were applied, all reaching similar conclusions. Sweet Creations is a rapidly growing business in an expanding market segment with exclusive contracts that guarantee substantial revenue streams. Its value reflects that reality. Richard whispered something in Daniel's ear, likely advising caution. The dynamic in the room had shifted palpably as Daniel grappled with information that fundamentally challenged his assumptions. We'll need time to review these claims and consult our own experts, Richard finally said, gathering the papers. Of course, Catherine agreed. In the meantime, the restraining order on the accounts remains in effect, and we expect full compliance with the court's directive for complete financial disclosure. As they prepared to leave, I addressed Daniel directly. One more thing. I want the records of all clients you've contacted about Sweet Creations. Every person you've attempted to turn against me or my business. That ends now or the next. Filing will include a restraining order specifically prohibiting any contact with my clients or business associates. His eyes flashed with anger, but Richard placed a warning hand on his arm. We understand, the attorney said, guiding Daniel toward the door. After they left, Catherine turned to me with a grim smile. That went better than expected. He genuinely had no idea about your business's value. He never bothered to find out, I said, the realization both painful and liberating. All these years, he assumed he knew without ever actually looking. His mistake, Catherine replied, gathering her notes, our advantage. That evening, I visited the Maple Street property alone, walking through the partially renovated space in the fading light. Electrical contractors had finished the main wiring that day, and for the first time, I could turn on the lights throughout the building. The vast open area was transforming daily, construction dust and exposed beams gradually giving way to the specialized facility I had envisioned. I stood in what would become the main production kitchen, imagining the gleaming equipment, soon to arrive, the team of bakers creating thousands of signature desserts for Harborview hotels. The concrete reality of this space, this tangible manifestation of my vision, stood in stark contrast to the fictions Daniel had constructed about my capabilities and ambitions. My phone buzzed with a text from Megan. Just got call from Lucas. At Riverside Bistro. Daniel contacted him today trying to cancel our standing order. Lucas told him to pound sand. Thought you should know for the legal file. I sighed, adding this to the growing list of Daniel's interference attempts. Each one strengthened our legal position while revealing the desperation behind his actions. The man who had once seemed so confident, so in control, was now flailing against the consequences of his own miscalculations. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Sarah, my sister, called early, her voice tight with concern. "Emma, have you seen the email?" she asked without preamble. "What email?" "Check your inbox. Daniel sent something to basically everyone we know, family, friends, business contacts. Well, you should read it yourself." I opened my email to find Daniel's message near the top of my inbox, sent to a distribution list that included virtually everyone in our social and professional circles. The subject line read, "Concerning Emma Reynolds and Sweet Creations. Important. Information." My heart pounded as I clicked to open it, bracing myself for whatever damage control strategy he'd devised. "Dear friends and colleagues," the email began with artificial cordiality. "It is with deep regret that I must address concerning developments regarding my wife, Emma, and her business, Sweet Creations. Many of you have relationships with Emma professionally or personally, and I feel obligated to share information that may affect your interactions with her." The knot in my stomach tightened as I continued reading. Emma has recently exhibited behaviors that have caused me and others significant concern. She has made business commitments far beyond her capability to fulfill, entered into contracts she cannot reasonably honor, and represented her small bakery operation as something far more substantial than it is. Most troublingly, she has initiated legal proceedings based on false allegations and misrepresentations of our marital finances. My fingers tightened around my phone as Daniel's calculated character assassination continued. Those of you who know me understand I have supported Emma's hobby business from its inception, providing both financial backing and professional connections. It pains me deeply to see that support exploited and her business used as a weapon in what should be a private matter between spouses. Several financial institutions and business partners have already recognized the unsustainable nature of her recent commitments and are reassessing their involvement. The final paragraph was perhaps the most insidious. "I share this not to damage Emma, whom I still care for deeply, but out of concern for those who might be negatively impacted by decisions made during what appears to be a period of personal instability. If you have outstanding commitments with Sweet Creations, I would strongly advise reviewing them with appropriate caution. For those concerned about Emma personally, I welcome your calls directly." He had signed it with his full professional signature, including his title and Stanton Financial's logo, deliberately lending institutional weight to his personal attack. "Emma, are you still there?" Sarah's voice recalled me to the phone call I'd nearly forgotten. "I'm here," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage building inside me. "I'm looking at it now." "It's outrageous," Sarah fumed. "Half the family called me this morning asking if you were having some kind of breakdown. As if you'd suddenly lost your mind and Daniel was nobly managing the fallout." "It's a calculated move," I said, my analytical mind cutting through the emotional reaction. "He's trying to undermine my credibility before the financial disclosures come due. If everyone thinks I'm unstable or delusional about my business, they'll be more likely to believe any claims he makes about our finances." "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked. "First, call Catherine," I replied, already formulating a strategy. "This email violates several aspects of proper conduct during divorce proceedings. Second, document every response and reaction from clients or contacts. And third, well, perhaps it's time to be more public about Sweet Creations' actual position." After assuring Sarah I was fine, angry but focused, I ended the call and immediately contacted Catherine. She requested I forward the email immediately and advised against sending any direct response to the distribution list. That's exactly what he wants, she explained. Any emotional response from you reinforces his narrative about instability. We'll address this through proper legal channels. By noon, my inbox was flooded with messages, some expressing concern, others assuring me of their continued support, and a distressing number requesting immediate meetings to discuss our arrangement with Sweet Creations. Daniel's message had achieved its intended effect, creating doubt and uncertainty throughout my business network. Megan found me in my office at the bakery, methodically categorizing and responding to each message. "This is unbelievable," she said, reading Daniel's email on my computer screen. "He's basically calling you delusional and financially incompetent to everyone we know." While positioning himself as the concerned, supportive husband, I added, the irony not lost on me. Classic manipulation. He's reframing his betrayal as protection. What did Catherine say? She's filing an emergency motion for a gag order and adding this to our evidence of malicious interference, I explained. But legal remedies take time and the damage is happening now. Megan leaned against my desk, arms crossed in thought. So we counter it now, not emotionally but with facts. I looked up at her, seeing where her thoughts were heading. The business valuation, the Harborview contract, the expansion progress. Exactly, she nodded. Not as a direct response to Daniel, but as a natural announcement of Sweet Creations. Growth. We've been keeping the Harborview deal relatively quiet during the initial planning phase. Maybe it's time for a proper press release. The idea had merit. Rather than dignifying Daniel's accusations with a direct rebuttal, we could simply present the objective reality of our business situation. Let facts speak for themselves. Get Lucas on the phone, I told Megan, referring to our contact at the local business journal. And ask Olivia if we can move up the photo shoot at the new facility to tomorrow. Over the next 24 hours, we executed a carefully orchestrated information campaign. A professional press release announced Sweet Creations' exclusive partnership with Harborview Hotels, including quotes from Robert Harrington expressing his confidence in our capabilities. We distributed professional photos of the renovation progress at Maple Street, highlighting the scale of our expansion. I accepted a last-minute invitation to speak on a panel about women entrepreneurs at the Chamber of Commerce, where I calmly outlined our growth trajectory and future projections. Each communication was measured, professional, and thoroughly documented with verifiable facts. Not once did I mention Daniel or reference the divorce. This wasn't about him, but about establishing the truth of what Sweet Creations had become. The effect was immediate and illuminating. Business contacts who had sent worried emails after Daniel's message now reached out with congratulations. Local financial institutions that had delayed our credit application suddenly found the process moving forward again. The narrative was shifting, not through emotional appeals but through demonstrated reality. 3 days after Daniel's email, Catherine called with news. The judge granted our emergency motion, she reported. Daniel is now under a court order prohibiting any further communications about you or Sweet Creations to business associates, friends, or family members. Additionally, the court found his email constituted harassment and potentially defamatory communication during pending proceedings. What's the practical effect? I asked, having learned to focus on actionable outcomes rather than legal terminology. He's been formally sanctioned, which damages his credibility with the court moving forward. More importantly, any violation of the gag order would result in significant penalties. And perhaps most satisfying, the judge has ordered an accelerated timeline for financial disclosure. Daniel has 72 hours to provide complete documentation of all accounts, domestic and foreign. The accelerated timeline was a significant victory. Daniel would have minimal opportunity to further obscure or rearrange his financial holdings before providing sworn statements about their existence and value. There's more, Catherine continued, her typically professional tone colored with satisfaction. One of Daniel's offshore transfers was flagged by banking compliance systems. It appears he may have violated certain financial regulations in his haste to move assets. His firm has placed him on administrative leave pending internal review. The news of Daniel's professional troubles brought complicated emotions. On one level, it represented strategic advantage in our legal proceedings. On another, more human level, it emphasized the tragic dimensions of what was unfolding. A man willing to risk his professional standing and personal integrity rather than face an equitable division of marital assets. What happens if his firm finds actual violations? I asked. It could range from termination to regulatory penalties, Catherine explained. In extreme cases, financial crimes can involve criminal charges, though that's speculative at this point. From our perspective, any formal findings would further strengthen our position regarding the prenuptial agreement's validity. Later that afternoon, as I supervised equipment installation at the Maple Street facility, my phone rang with Daniel's number. My initial instinct was to ignore it. Our attorneys had advised against direct communication, but something made me answer. Emma? His voice sounded strained, lacking its usual confident polish. We need to talk. Our attorneys should handle any necessary communication, I replied neutrally. This isn't about the legal proceedings, he said quickly. It's about the email. I wanted to apologize. The unexpected statement momentarily left me silent. In 7 years of marriage, I had rarely heard Daniel offer a genuine apology for anything. I shouldn't have sent it, he continued into my silence. It was reactive and inappropriate. Why did you? I asked, genuinely curious about his reasoning. He sighed heavily. When you presented those business valuation figures, I felt blindsided. I thought you were exaggerating to strengthen your position. Then I started hearing about the Harborview contract, seeing the press coverage about the expansion. I realized I'd completely misjudged what you've built. Yes, I agreed simply. You did. I've been placed on leave at Stanton, he admitted, his voice tight. The compliance department found irregularities in some of my client accounts, unrelated to our situation, but the timing couldn't be worse. Between that and the court sanctions, I'm in a precarious position. I recognized what this call truly was. Not an apology, but a strategic retreat. Daniel wasn't sorry for trying to undermine me. He was sorry it had backfired so spectacularly. Now, facing professional consequences alongside legal setbacks, he was recalculating his approach. What do you want, Daniel? I asked directly. To resolve this reasonably, he replied. The court order for financial disclosure? I'm prepared to provide everything if we can discuss settlement terms directly. No attorneys, no further escalation. The request confirmed my assessment. Daniel wasn't seeking reconciliation, but damage control. He wanted to negotiate from a position of perceived goodwill rather than face the consequences of complete financial transparency under court supervision. That's not possible, I told him. This stopped being a private matter between us when you decided to hide assets and sabotage my business. Everything proceeds through proper legal channels now. Emma, be reasonable, he pressed, a hint of his usual authoritative tone returning. Neither of us benefits from dragging this out. The legal fees alone will. The legal fees are worth every penny to ensure this is resolved fairly, I interrupted. Submit your financial disclosures as ordered. After that, our attorneys can discuss potential settlement terms. After ending the call, I stood in the center of what would soon be Sweet Creation's main production kitchen, surrounded by half-installed equipment and the sounds of construction. 3 months ago, I might have accepted Daniel's overture, eager to avoid conflict and willing to settle for less than I deserved. The woman who had silently absorbed his dismissal of her achievements would have prioritized peace over justice. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own value and the worth of what she had built. The following day, Robert Harrington of Harborview Hotels requested a meeting at the Maple Street facility. He arrived precisely on time, accompanied by his executive chef and director of guest experiences. "Impressive progress," he commented, surveying the renovation work as I guided them through the space. "You're on schedule for full operations next month?" "Ahead of schedule, actually," I confirmed. "The main production lines will be operational in 3 weeks, with full capacity by the end of the month." Robert nodded approvingly. "That's why we wanted to meet in person. Given the exceptional quality of your products and your clear operational capabilities, we're interested in discussing an expanded partnership." The executive chef, Maria Delgado, elaborated, "We've been developing concepts for signature restaurant desserts beyond the room, amenities covered in our current agreement. Having sampled your product line extensively, we believe Sweet Creations would be the ideal partner for this initiative as well." By the end of the 2-hour meeting, we had outlined terms for an additional contract that would nearly double the scope of our original agreement with Harborview. The expanded partnership would require further staffing and potentially additional production space. Challenges that would have seemed overwhelming just months ago, but now represented exciting growth opportunities. As we finalized the preliminary terms, Robert mentioned casually, "I received an interesting call from your husband's attorney yesterday. He wanted to verify certain aspects of our contract for what he called divorce-related asset valuation purposes." I informed him that our agreements with Sweet Creations are confidential business matters between our companies, and we don't discuss them with third parties without proper authorization. "I appreciate your discretion," I replied, maintaining professional composure despite my internal reaction to this new evidence of Daniel's maneuvering. "Of course," Robert nodded. "We value our business relationships and the people behind them. Your company's growth is impressive, not just in its scale, but in its thoughtful execution. That reflects leadership worth supporting." After they departed, I called Catherine to report this latest development. She added it to the growing file of Daniel's attempts to circumvent proper legal channels, noting that contacting my business partners directly after the court's gag order potentially constituted a violation worth bringing to the judge's attention. The court-ordered deadline for Daniel's financial disclosures arrived the following day. The documentation, delivered to Catherine's office under seal, revealed the full extent of his financial maneuvering. In addition to our known joint accounts, Daniel had established 3 offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and a shell company in Delaware through which he had filtered significant portions of his bonus compensation over the past 2 years. Most damaging was evidence that he had begun these arrangements 18 months earlier, well before any marital difficulties had surfaced, directly contradicting his claim that these were recent tax planning strategies unrelated to divorce. Planning. "This is more than enough to invalidate the prenuptial agreement," Catherine concluded after reviewing the materials with her team. "His systematic concealment of assets constitutes fraud, which renders the agreement unenforceable. Combined with the documented infidelity triggering the morality clause, we have multiple grounds for setting it aside entirely." The financial disclosure also revealed something unexpected. Daniel's position was more precarious than his confident exterior suggested. While he had indeed moved substantial assets offshore, his recent investment choices had performed poorly. Several high-risk ventures had resulted in significant losses, and his administrative leave from Stanton had frozen access to the expected Anderson merger bonus that would have replenished his resources. "He's cash poor despite the asset shifting," Catherine observed. "That explains the increasingly desperate attempts to settle quickly. He needs liquidity." This insight shifted our strategic position considerably. Daniel's vulnerability created leverage we hadn't anticipated. He needed resolution potentially more urgently than we did. 2 days later, Richard Geller requested a formal settlement conference. Catherine and I arrived at the neutral location, a conference room at a downtown law firm unaffiliated with either party, to find Daniel and his attorney already seated. Daniel looked noticeably worse than at our last meeting, the strain of professional uncertainty and legal pressure evident in his appearance. Richard opened with a surprising statement. My client wishes to expedite resolution of this matter and is prepared to offer terms more favorable than previously discussed. The new proposal included returning all funds transferred offshore, liquidating the Delaware Shell Company, and dividing the proceeds of joint investment accounts equally. Daniel would retain his retirement accounts and personal possessions, while I would receive the house and full ownership of Sweet Creations. In exchange, Richard continued, my client requests confidentiality regarding the details of settlement and expedited conclusion of proceedings. Catherine and I exchanged glances. The offer represented a significant shift from Daniel's initial position, but still fell short of equitable division given the full financial picture now available to us. The proposal is inadequate, Catherine responded. Given the documented concealment of assets and violation of the prenuptial agreement's provisions, our client is entitled to a more substantial settlement. Richard leaned forward. My client has voluntarily disclosed all financial holdings and is offering fair division of marital assets. Protracted litigation serves neither party's interests. Your client disclosed financial holdings under court order after attempting to hide them, Catherine corrected, and the division proposed fails to account for the appreciation of assets during the marriage or the compensatory damages for business interference. Daniel, who had remained silent until this point, finally spoke. What do you want, Emma? Just tell me what it will take to end this. The direct question caught me by surprise, looking at him across the conference table. This man who had planned to discard me with minimal compensation while starting fresh with his younger girlfriend. I realized I felt more pity than anger. Daniel had constructed his entire identity around financial success and control, never recognizing the genuine value I was building alongside him. Full financial transparency, I began, meeting his gaze steadily. Complete division of all marital assets, including those you attempted to hide. The house, which I'll likely sell as it holds little sentimental value now. Documented agreement that you will have no claims whatsoever on Sweet Creations or its future earnings. And a non-interference clause with substantial penalties preventing any further attempts to undermine my business relationships. Daniel's expression tightened. And in return? Efficiency, I replied simply. No prolonged court battle, no public dissection of your financial improprieties or personal infidelity. A clean, quick conclusion that allows both of us to move forward. Richard and Catherine exchanged glances, recognizing the negotiation had shifted into its final phase. The attorneys stepped out to confer privately, leaving Daniel and me alone in the conference room for the first time since our confrontation at the house. The silence stretched between us, heavy with all that had been revealed in the weeks since our anniversary. Daniel stared at his hands, wedding band still in place despite everything, a detail that struck me as oddly performative, given his relationship with Vanessa. Why did you do it? I finally asked, the question that had haunted me since overhearing his phone call. Was it really just about the money? Or was there something else, something I didn't see or understand about our marriage? Daniel looked up, surprise flashing across his face at the genuine inquiry beneath my composed exterior. It wasn't, he began, then stopped, reconsidering. It wasn't just the money, though that was part of it. The Anderson merger represented years of work, the biggest deal of my career. The thought of splitting that bonus? He shook his head. But it was more than that. What then? I pressed. Control, he admitted after a moment. When we met, you were in marketing, focused on your career, but ultimately following a conventional path. The bakery was supposed to be a hobby, something safe and predictable that wouldn't challenge the life I'd envisioned for us. His candor was unexpected. For perhaps the first time in our marriage, Daniel was speaking without calculation or performance. But it became something else entirely, he continued. You became someone else, more confident, more independent. Your success didn't fit the narrative I'd created about our relationship, where I was the provider, the decision maker. So you planned to discard me before I outgrew you completely, I concluded, the pieces finally assembling into a coherent picture. Daniel winced at the blunt assessment. I told myself it was about compatibility, that we'd grown in different directions. But yes, there was an element of preemptive action, ending things on my terms when I still held the financial advantage. The admission should have been infuriating, but instead, it brought a strange sense of clarity. Daniel's betrayal hadn't been mysterious or incomprehensible. It had been the logical conclusion of a worldview that couldn't accommodate my growth beyond the role he'd assigned me. And Vanessa? I asked, curiosity rather than jealousy prompting. The question. A symptom, not the cause, he replied with surprising self-awareness. She admired me the way you used to, before you became successful in your own right. It was comfortable, familiar. Our attorneys returned before the conversation could continue further, but the brief exchange had shifted something fundamental between us. The mythology of our marriage had been dismantled, leaving only the unvarnished reality of who we had been to each other and why that relationship had ultimately failed. We have the framework for an agreement, Catherine announced. Mr. Geller and I will draft the formal settlement documents for review, but we've reached consensus on the major points. The settlement terms were comprehensive, equal division of all marital assets, including the offshore accounts and investments. The house transferred to my name with Daniel receiving his portion of the equity. My full retention of Sweet Creations with no claims from Daniel on past or future earnings. And perhaps most importantly, a non-interference clause with substantial financial penalties should Daniel attempt to contact my clients or business associates for any reason other than legitimate professional purposes unrelated to our history. In exchange, the proceedings would remain confidential, with neither party discussing the financial specifics or personal details publicly. The settlement would be processed through private mediation rather than open court, protecting Daniel's already precarious professional standing from further damage. Is this acceptable to both parties? Catherine asked after outlining the terms. Daniel nodded, resignation and something like relief mixing in his expression. Yes. It is, I confirmed, the weight of weeks of legal maneuvering beginning to lift at the prospect of resolution. As the meeting concluded, Daniel caught my eye briefly. I underestimated you, he said quietly. I won't make that mistake again. It wasn't an apology, but an acknowledgement. Perhaps the most honest communication we'd had in years. No, I agreed. You won't. Walking out of the building into the bright spring afternoon, I felt a curious lightness. The settlement wasn't final. Documents would need to be drafted, reviewed, and signed. But the path forward was clear. The marriage that had defined 7 years of my life was ending, not with the one-sided abandonment Daniel had planned, but with a negotiated conclusion that recognized the value I had built independently and alongside him. Catherine walked me to my car, her professional demeanor softening slightly. You held your ground admirably through this entire process, she observed. Many clients in your position would have accepted less to avoid confrontation. 6 months ago, I might have, I admitted. But discovering his plans on our anniversary changed something fundamental for me. It wasn't just about the divorce or the money. It was realizing how completely he had undervalued me, personally and professionally. Well, that particular misconception has been thoroughly corrected, Catherine noted with satisfaction. The valuation of Sweet Creations was the leverage that ultimately brought him to reasonable terms. Indeed, the forensic accountant's assessment of my business had proven pivotal. What Daniel had dismissed as a hobby was projected to generate over $4 million in annual revenue with the Harborview contracts. with a market valuation that placed it firmly in the category of serious mid-sized enterprises with substantial growth potential. "What happens now?" I asked, suddenly aware that all my recent energy had been focused on legal battles and business expansion, with little thought to the emotional dimensions of ending my marriage. Practically speaking, we finalize the paperwork, transfer assets, according to the agreement, and file the dissolution with minimal court involvement, Catherine explained. "Personally." She hesitated, her professional reserve momentarily giving way to genuine concern. "That's entirely up to you. Some clients find closure in the legal resolution. Others need additional time and space to process the emotional aspects." That evening, as I returned to Megan's guest room, still my temporary home until the settlement was finalized, I contemplated Catherine's observation. The legal victory felt hollow when separated from its emotional context. I had won decisively, but what exactly had I won? Financial security, certainly. Professional autonomy, without question. But these were defensive achievements, protecting what was mine rather than building something new. Megan found me on her back porch, nursing a glass of wine and staring into the gathering twilight. "Settlement conference went well?" she asked, joining me with her own glass. "Better than expected," I confirmed. "We have an agreement in principle. The documents should be ready next week." "That's huge, Emma. You should be celebrating." "I know, it's just..." I searched for words to describe the emptiness beneath the victory. I've been so focused on fighting back, on not letting him take what I've built. Now that it's almost over, I'm wondering what comes next. Megan considered this thoughtfully. "What would you want to come next if the divorce had never happened? If you were just Emma, bakery owner, without all this legal drama?" The question penetrated the fog of legal battles and betrayal that had consumed my recent months. What did I want, independent of my response to Daniel's actions? "The Maple Street facility," I began slowly, genuine excitement warming my voice for the first time in our conversation. "Fulfilling the Harborview contract brilliantly. Maybe exploring that second retail location we were considering before everything imploded. Developing the cookbook concept we discussed last year." Megan smiled knowingly. "See? That's still all there waiting for you. The difference is you'll be building it on a foundation you control completely, without anyone dismissing or undermining your vision." She was right, of course. While the circumstances were painful, the divorce would ultimately free me from the subtle limitations Daniel had placed on my ambitions. The constant need to downplay my successes to accommodate his ego, the careful navigation of his moods when my business achievements threatened to overshadow his. "There's something else," Megan added, refilling our glasses. "You haven't mentioned it, but I've watched it happening these past weeks. You've changed, Em. You're more decisive, more confident in your judgment. The woman who started Sweet Creations was talented but hesitant, always looking for validation, second-guessing her instincts. The woman sitting here now makes multi-million-dollar decisions without flinching." Her observation resonated deeply. I had changed, in ways both subtle and profound. The crisis Daniel precipitated had forced me to recognize capacities I hadn't fully acknowledged: strategic thinking, decisive leadership, unwavering determination. "I had to," I replied simply. "There wasn't really a choice." "There's always a choice," Megan countered. "You could have collapsed, compromised, accepted his narrative about your business and your capabilities. Plenty of people would have. You didn't." 3 days later, I met with the team at Maple Street to review final preparations before equipment. Testing began. The transformation of the space was nearly complete. Industrial mixers installed, specialized baking ovens positioned, packaging stations assembled. What had been an empty warehouse just weeks ago now hummed with potential energy, ready to become the production center that would fulfill our expanding contracts. As Miguel, our newly hired operations manager, walked me through the final installation timeline. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Settlement documents ready for review. Can you come to the office this afternoon?" The timing felt appropriate, one chapter concluding as another prepared to begin. I confirmed the appointment and returned my attention to Miguel's detailed explanation of our production capacity and efficiency projections. At full operation, we can produce 200 individual desserts per day on each line, he explained, indicating the primary production area. With 3 lines running simultaneously, that gives us capacity for the Harborview contract plus approximately 40% additional volume for other clients. "And staffing?" I asked, mentally calculating labor costs against projected revenue. "We've filled 18 of the 22 positions, with final interviews scheduled for the remaining roles next week. Training begins Monday for the first group." Each detail confirmed what the forensic accountant had recognized in her valuation. Sweet. Creations wasn't merely growing. It was transforming into a sophisticated operation, capable of meeting demand from major clients while maintaining the quality that had built our reputation. Later that afternoon, I sat in Catherine's office reviewing the settlement documents. The legal language formalized what we had negotiated: equitable division of assets, clear separation of business interests, protection against future interference. The marriage that had begun with hopeful promises was ending with carefully crafted clauses and subclauses, each designed to disentangle our lives permanently. "Everything appears in order," I confirmed after a thorough reading. "When will Daniel sign?" "His attorney has scheduled his review for tomorrow morning," Catherine replied. "Assuming no last-minute objections, we could have fully executed documents by end of week." "And after that?" "After that, we file the settlement with the court along with the dissolution petition. Since it's uncontested and the terms are pre-negotiated, the process should be relatively quick. You'll legally be single again within 30-45 days, depending on court scheduling." The timeline was surprisingly brief for ending 7 years of marriage. Then again, the emotional conclusion had occurred weeks ago, the moment I overheard Daniel's anniversary day betrayal. Everything since had been merely formalizing what was already broken beyond repair. "There's one more thing you should know," Catherine added, her tone carefully neutral. "Daniel's situation at Stanton Financial has been resolved. He's been terminated, effective immediately." The news wasn't entirely surprising given the compliance issues that had emerged, but the finality of it still registered as significant. Daniel's identity had been so thoroughly intertwined with his position there, his status, his connections, his self-image all flowing from his role as a senior investment banker. "Do you know why?" I asked, curious despite myself about the specific reasons for his dismissal. "The official statement cites violations of firm policies regarding client account management and ethical standards," Catherine replied. "Unofficially, my sources indicate the internal investigation found multiple instances where client funds were temporarily diverted for personal use before being returned, similar to the patterns we identified in your joint accounts, but potentially more serious given the fiduciary responsibilities involved." The revelation wasn't satisfying as much as sobering. Daniel's carefully constructed professional facade had crumbled completely, revealing patterns of behavior that extended beyond our marriage into his client relationships. The man who had dismissed my business ethics while planning to abandon me with minimal resources had himself violated core principles of financial stewardship. "Will there be criminal charges?" I asked, the potential implications suddenly expanding beyond our divorce. "That remains to be seen," Catherine answered carefully. "Regulatory investigations move at their own pace. For now, it's a professional, rather than criminal matter, but that could change depending on what further investigation reveals." As I drove from Catherine's office to the bakery, I contemplated how thoroughly our trajectories had reversed. When Daniel had made his secret divorce plans, he had anticipated emerging financially stronger, professionally ascendant, and personally unburdened, free to enjoy his success with Vanessa, while I struggled to maintain my hobby business with limited resources. Instead, he faced professional disgrace, financial scrutiny, and the loss of the carefully cultivated image he had valued above all else. Meanwhile, Sweet Creations was expanding dramatically. My professional reputation was enhanced rather than damaged by recent events, and I had discovered reserves of strength and capability previously untapped. At the bakery, I found Megan in deep discussion with our newly hired marketing consultant about the grand opening event planned for the Maple Street facility. They had spread potential invitation designs across the conference table, along with draft press materials highlighting our expansion and the Harbor View partnership. "What do you think?" Megan asked, indicating the options. "We're leaning toward the minimalist design with the gold embossing, but the watercolor elements on this one reflect our artisanal approach nicely." I studied both designs, appreciating the careful thought behind each. The watercolor, I decided. It connotes craftsmanship while still appearing sophisticated. Let's make sure the Harbor View logo is prominently featured as our anchor client. The consultant made notes, visibly pleased with the clear direction. And for the guest list, we've drafted a preliminary version focusing on local business leaders, hospitality industry contacts, and food writers. Add Robert Harrington and his executive team personally, I instructed. And Lucas Wright from Riverside Bistro. He stood by us when others wavered. Actually, I want to review the full list before it's finalized. Some relationships proved more valuable than others during recent challenges. The comment wasn't meant as bitterness, but as practical assessment. The turbulence surrounding my divorce had revealed which business connections were based on mutual respect and which were more contingent or superficial. Those distinctions would inform my approach to relationships moving forward, both professional and personal. After finalizing the event details, I retreated to my office to review production projections for the coming quarter. The Harbor View launch would strain our resources initially, making careful planning essential to maintain quality standards while scaling operations. A knock at my door interrupted my calculations. Sarah stood in the doorway, holding a small gift bag. "Surprise. Visit," she said, setting the bag on my desk. "I figured you could use a break from all the legal and business intensity." "Perfect timing," I admitted, realizing I'd been working for hours without pause. "What's this?" "Open it," she encouraged, taking the visitor's chair across from my desk. Inside the bag, I found a small wooden plaque with an engraved quote, "She built a life she loved from ingredients others underestimated." "Sarah," I breathed, unexpectedly moved by the simple gift. "It's perfect." "I saw it and immediately thought of you," she explained. "Not just because of the baking reference, though that's appropriate. It's what you've done these past months, taken circumstances that could have destroyed you and instead used them to build something stronger." I placed the plaque on my desk, positioning it where I could see it daily. It hasn't always felt that way. There were moments I thought I might collapse under the weight of it all. "But you didn't," Sarah pointed out. "And now look, expansions, contracts, growing team. All because you refused to accept Daniel's assessment of your worth." Her words echoed what Megan had observed days earlier, the fundamental shift in how I perceived myself and my capabilities. "Speaking of Daniel," Sarah continued, her expression turning serious, "have you heard about his termination from Stanton?" "Catherine mentioned it today," I confirmed. Not entirely surprising given the financial improprieties that emerged during discovery. "It's all over the financial news," Sarah reported. "Not the specifics, but the fact of his dismissal for ethical violations. His professional reputation is essentially destroyed. The information should have brought satisfaction, a form of justice for the man who had planned to discard me while belittling my business. Instead, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, vindication, but also a strange emptiness. as if the collapse of Daniel's carefully constructed facade revealed the hollowness at its core. "How do you feel about that?" Sarah asked, watching my reaction carefully. "Honestly, I don't feel the satisfaction I might have expected," I admitted. "There's a certain poetic justice in it. The man who dismissed my business ethics while secretly planning to abandon me is now facing professional disgrace for ethical violations. But mostly, I feel disconnected from it. Like I'm observing the downfall of someone I used to know rather than experiencing it personally." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "That's probably healthy. Your life is moving forward while his is unraveling. The best revenge is living well, as they say." "It's not even about revenge anymore," I realized aloud. "That's what's changed. Initially, I fought back because I refused to be discarded on his terms. Now I'm building something because it fulfills me, because I'm good at it, not as a response to his betrayal." "Personal growth looks good on you," Sarah smiled. "Now, enough serious talk. When was the last time you took an actual break? Not working late at the bakery or reviewing legal documents, but genuinely relaxing?" I laughed, unable to recall such a moment in recent memory. "Define break?" "That's what I thought," Sarah said, standing decisively. "Get your purse. We're going to dinner, and the only acceptable topics of conversation are movies, books, and that attractive new chef at Riverside Bistro that Megan mentioned." The evening with Sarah provided exactly the respite I needed. Hours of conversation unrelated to divorce proceedings, business expansion, or financial disclosures. For the first time in months, I felt the space to simply be Emma, the person. Not Emma, the business owner, or Emma, the divorcing spouse. The following morning brought a text from Catherine. "Daniel signed settlement documents this morning. All terms as agreed. Congratulations." With those simple words, the legal battle that had consumed my attention for weeks reached its functional conclusion. The marriage wasn't technically dissolved yet. That would require court filing and processing. But the substantive issues were resolved. Daniel would receive his portion of our joint assets, minus the offshore accounts he had attempted to hide. I would retain full ownership of Sweet Creations and the house, which I planned to sell once the market timing was favorable. I forwarded the news to Megan, who responded with a champagne bottle emoji and celebratory drinks after work. Before I could reply, another message arrived, this one from an unexpected source. Vanessa, Daniel's assistant and apparent girlfriend, had sent a LinkedIn connection request accompanied by a brief note. "Congratulations on your expansion. Impressive growth trajectory." The outreach was surprising given our complicated connection. After a moment's consideration, I accepted the request and responded neutrally, "Thank you. Wishing you well professionally." Her reply came almost immediately. "I've left Stanton, starting with Hartford Financial next month. Clean slate." The subtext wasn't difficult to decipher. She was distancing herself not just from Stanton but from Daniel as well, establishing professional independence as his circumstances deteriorated. Whether their personal relationship had similarly dissolved remained unclear, but her strategic repositioning spoke volumes. "Congratulations on the new position," I replied, maintaining professional courtesy without engaging further. That afternoon, I signed the settlement documents in Catherine's office, my signature formalizing the end of 7 years of marriage. The process was surprisingly anticlimactic. A few signatures, a brief explanation of next steps, and a handshake with my attorney. "How do you feel?" Catherine asked as we concluded. "Relieved," I answered honestly. "Ready to focus entirely on the future instead of legal battles." "That future looks exceptionally bright from where I'm standing," she observed. Not many clients emerge from divorce proceedings with their professional standing enhanced rather than damaged. It wasn't the outcome Daniel anticipated when he made his plans, I acknowledged. the irony not lost on me. No, Catherine agreed, though I suspect he's facing more immediate concerns now. Her cryptic comment prompted me to ask, "Have you heard something new about his situation?" "Nothing specific," she replied carefully. "But regulatory investigations tend to accelerate once employment termination occurs. Without the firm's institutional protection, individual liability becomes more pronounced." The implication was clear. Daniel's professional difficulties might be just beginning, potentially extending beyond employment consequences to regulatory penalties or even legal jeopardy. "Will that affect our settlement?" I asked, the practical question emerging despite my emotional distance from his circumstances. "The agreement is signed and will be filed immediately," Catherine assured me. "Any subsequent developments in his professional situation won't impact the terms we've established." Leaving Catherine's office, I drove directly to Maple Street, where equipment testing was scheduled to begin. The facility hummed with activity. Technicians calibrating mixers, staff arranging workstations, Miguel overseeing it all with clipboard in hand. "Perfect timing," he greeted me. "We're about to test the primary production line. Would you like to do the honors?" The symbolic significance wasn't lost on me. This facility, this expansion, represented everything Daniel had underestimated. My vision, my business acumen, my determination to build something substantial. Activating the equipment that would power Sweet Creations' next chapter felt like the perfect punctuation to the day's earlier conclusion. "Absolutely," I replied, following Miguel to the central control panel. With the press of a button, the main production line hummed to life, conveyor belts moving smoothly, mixing stations rotating with mechanical precision, the entire integrated system functioning just as designed. A spontaneous round of applause broke out among the staff witnessing this milestone. "All systems nominal," the lead technician confirmed after checking various gauges and settings. "Ready for production testing whenever you are." I turned to Miguel with a decisive nod. "Let's start tomorrow. Small batch, full protocol, test every station in sequence." Production testing wasn't scheduled until next week, he reminded me, though his tone suggested approval rather than opposition. "We're ahead of schedule on installation," I pointed out. "No reason to delay. The Harborview launch is in 3 weeks, and I want multiple full production runs completed before then to identify and resolve any issues." As the team dispersed to prepare for the accelerated timeline, I walked the length of the production line, mentally reviewing each step. In our process, from raw ingredients to finished packaged desserts ready for delivery to Harborview properties, what had begun in my kitchen with simple recipes and local ingredients had evolved into a sophisticated operation capable of meeting demand from major hospitality clients while maintaining the quality standards that had built our reputation. My phone buzzed with a notification, an email from Robert Harrington confirming his attendance at our facility opening event, along with several key members of his executive team and the food and beverage directors from 5 Harborview properties. "Looking forward to celebrating this milestone with you," he wrote. "Our properties are eagerly anticipating the Sweet Creations rollout next month." As I composed a reply, another message arrived. This one from Lucas Wright at Riverside Bistro, our first major restaurant client who had stood firmly by Sweet Creations when Daniel attempted to undermine our relationships. "Emma just heard about your settlement being finalized. Congratulations on closing that chapter and on the impressive expansion. Riverside is proud to have been part of your journey from the beginning, and we're excited to feature Sweet Creations prominently on our new summer menu. Perhaps we could discuss expanding our relationship to include some exclusive offerings?" The message warmed me with its genuine support and the opportunity it represented. Lucas had recognized Sweet Creations' potential when we were still operating. From my converted kitchen, becoming our first significant wholesale client when others had hesitated. "Thank you, Lucas," I replied. "Your support has meant more than you know, especially during recent challenges. I'd love to discuss exclusive offerings for Riverside, Perhaps featuring seasonal ingredients from local farms? Let's schedule time next week to explore possibilities. That evening, Megan insisted on the promised celebration drinks, organizing an impromptu gathering at her apartment with Sarah and Olivia, our marketing consultant who had become a friend through our work. Together. The atmosphere was festive but intimate. Just 4 women sharing wine and conversation without the pressure of business discussions or legal strategies. To Emma, Sarah proposed, raising her glass, who turned betrayal into triumph and proved that success truly is the best revenge. And to Sweet Creations, Megan added, from kitchen counter to corporate contracts in 3 years flat. As glasses clinked in toast, I felt a wave of gratitude for these women who had supported me through the most challenging period of my life, offering professional expertise, emotional sustenance, and unwavering belief in my capabilities when I needed it most. I couldn't have done any of this without you, I acknowledged. Especially you, Megan. You've been there from the beginning, believing in Sweet Creations when it was just a concept and a few recipes. Please, Megan laughed, though her eyes betrayed emotion. You would have succeeded regardless. I just had the good sense to hop on the train early. Speaking of success, Olivia interjected, setting down her wine glass. Have you seen today's business journal? There's a feature on women entrepreneurs in Connecticut, and you're prominently mentioned. She pulled up the article on her tablet, passing it to me. The piece highlighted several female-led businesses experiencing significant growth, with Sweet Creations receiving extended coverage thanks to the Harborview contract and production facility expansion. Emma Reynolds has transformed a boutique bakery into a growing enterprise poised to become a significant player in the specialty dessert market. I read aloud, the words still somewhat surreal when applied to my business. With major contracts and a state-of-the-art production facility, Sweet Creations exemplifies the entrepreneurial spirit driving Connecticut's small business resurgence. Not bad for a hobby, Sarah remarked pointedly, referencing Daniel's dismissive characterization. The journalist reached out for additional comments for a follow-up piece, Olivia mentioned. They're particularly interested in the expansion process and your leadership approach. I told them you'd be available after the facility opening. The prospect of discussing Sweet Creations as a business case study rather than a personal achievement marked another evolution in my perspective. The company had transcended its origins as my creative outlet to become a notable enterprise in its own right, worthy of business analysis and industry attention. Later that night, as I prepared to leave Megan's apartment, my temporary home, for weeks now, a realization struck me. I should start looking for my own place, I said as Megan walked me to the door. Now that the settlement's final, I can sell the house and find something that actually feels like mine. No rush, Megan assured me. The guest room is yours as long as you need it. I know, and I appreciate that more than I can express. But it's time for a fresh start in all aspects of my life. New business chapter, new personal chapter. Megan nodded understanding. Any thoughts on what you're looking for? Something downtown, maybe? Close to the bakery and Maple Street? Perhaps a loft space with good natural light. The vision formed as I spoke it. An urban, contemporary space entirely different from the traditional suburban home Daniel and I had shared. Something that's completely different from the life I had with Daniel. I like this forward-looking Emma, Megan approved. Though I'll miss having you here. My grocery bills will certainly decrease without your stress baking. Episodes. I laughed, acknowledging the coping mechanism that had periodically filled Megan's kitchen with experimental pastries during particularly tense phases of the divorce proceedings. I promise to still bring you baked goods regularly, I assured her. Consider it rent in arrears. The following morning, I arrived at Maple Street early to oversee final preparations for our first production test. The team had stayed late setting up ingredients, calibrating equipment, and reviewing protocols. Now, with actual product about, To move through our new systems, the months of planning would face their first real-world assessment. Miguel met me at the entrance, clipboard already in hand and containing the day's detailed schedule. "Everyone's in position," he reported. "We're starting with the signature chocolate soufflé cakes for Harborview, most technically demanding product, so if the system can handle those, everything else should flow smoothly." I nodded approval, appreciating his strategic approach. "Full documentation of every stage. I want detailed notes on any adjustments needed, no matter how minor." "Already arranged," he confirmed. "Quality control checkpoints at each transition, with samples pulled for evaluation." As we walked toward the production area, Miguel hesitated momentarily. "There's something else you should know. Someone from regulatory enforcement is here to observe our food safety protocols. Apparently, they received an anonymous tip about potential violations." My step faltered briefly as Miguel's words registered. Regulatory enforcement? Today of all days? The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. With our settlement finalized just yesterday and production testing beginning today, an anonymous complaint about food safety violations carried Daniel's fingerprints unmistakably. "Where are they now?" I asked, my voice deliberately even. "Conference room with our food safety compliance officer," Miguel replied. "Maria is walking them through our HACCP plan and certification documentation." I nodded, silently grateful, for my insistence on exceeding regulatory requirements rather than merely meeting them. Sweet Creations' food safety protocols had been developed with guidance from a consultant who had previously worked for the FDA, ensuring we operated at standards typically expected of much larger manufacturers. "Good, let them inspect whatever they want," I decided. "We have nothing to hide and everything documented. In fact, give them complete access. I want total transparency." Miguel looked mildly surprised at this approach. "You're not concerned?" "About our safety standards? Not in the slightest. About the motivation behind the complaint? That's another matter." I smiled thinly. But the best response to baseless allegations is demonstrable excellence. As we entered the production area, I pushed the regulatory issue to the background, focusing instead on the milestone before us. The team stood ready at their stations, ingredients prepped, equipment humming in standby mode. This first production test represented months of planning, investment, and vision, the physical manifestation of Sweet Creations' evolution from artisanal bakery to specialized manufacturer. "Good morning, everyone," I addressed the assembled team. Today marks the first production run in our new facility, a significant step toward fulfilling the Harborview contract and establishing our expanded capabilities. This isn't just about making desserts. It's about proving we can maintain our quality standards at scale. The staff listened attentively, many having joined Sweet Creations specifically for this expansion phase, drawn by the opportunity to participate in building something substantial. We'll encounter issues today. That's the purpose of testing. Identify problems, document them precisely, and collaborate on solutions. Nothing leaves this facility unless it meets our exacting standards. Harborview chose Sweet Creations for quality first, volume second. We will deliver both. With a nod to Miguel, I signaled for production to begin. The primary line activated in sequence, ingredients measured and combined with mechanical precision, batter dispensed into individual forms, conveyor belts carrying them smoothly toward specialized ovens calibrated to our exact specifications. As the first batch of chocolate soufflé cakes entered the baking phase, I moved to the conference room where the regulatory inspection was underway. Maria, our compliance officer, was methodically walking two inspectors through our documentation, her calm professionalism evident in her thorough explanations. "Ms. Reynolds," she acknowledged as I entered. "I was just reviewing our hazard analysis and critical control points with the inspectors." "Excellent," I replied, turning to the officials with a professional smile. "I understand you're responding to an anonymous complaint?" The senior inspector, a woman in her 50s with the weary expression of someone who had conducted countless such visits, nodded. Standard procedure when we receive specific allegations regarding food safety practices. Of course. May I ask the nature of these allegations? It would help us address any concerns directly. She consulted her tablet briefly. The complaint alleges improper equipment sanitation procedures, inadequate temperature controls during production, and insufficient training for new staff regarding contamination prevention. Each accusation was not just false but easily disproven, targeting precisely the areas where we had invested most heavily in documentation and certification. I see, I replied, maintaining my composed demeanor. You'll find our sanitation procedures exceed FDA recommendations, with validation testing documented daily. Temperature monitoring occurs automatically at 12 points throughout production, with data logging and alerts for any deviation outside specified parameters. And our staff training program requires safety certification before any employee handles product components. Maria smoothly retrieved additional documentation supporting each point, including third-party verification of our procedures by an independent food safety auditor. We welcome thorough inspection, I continued. Our first production test is actually underway now if you'd like to observe real-time implementation of our safety protocols. The inspectors exchanged glances, clearly recognizing that whatever they had expected to find based on the anonymous complaint, the reality before them contradicted those expectations entirely. That would be helpful, the senior inspector acknowledged. For the next 2 hours, we escorted them through every aspect of our operation, from ingredient receiving and storage through production and packaging. At each stage, our staff demonstrated comprehensive understanding of safety requirements, meticulous adherence to procedures, and proper documentation of compliance checks. By the time the inspection concluded, the officials' initial skepticism had visibly transformed into professional approval. Your operation exceeds compliance requirements in several categories, the senior inspector noted as she completed her report. Particularly impressive for a facility this new. Safety and quality are foundational principles, I replied. We invested heavily in both because our reputation depends on them. As they prepared to leave, the younger inspector hesitated. Just to be clear, this complaint appears to be without merit. You'll receive our official report within 10 business days, but I don't anticipate any citations or concerns. Thank you, I acknowledged. May I ask if the complainant requested notification of the inspection results? The senior inspector studied me briefly, understanding dawning in her expression. They did. Standard procedure would include informing them that their concerns were investigated and appropriate action taken, without specific details. I see, I nodded, the confirmation of Daniel's involvement requiring no further elaboration. We appreciate your thoroughness. After escorting the inspectors out, I returned to find Maria already briefing Miguel on the outcome. False alarm? He asked as I joined them. Entirely, I confirmed, though not unexpected. How's production testing proceeding? Remarkably well, he reported, visibly pleased. Minor adjustments to conveyor speed needed at Station 3, and the packaging. Alignment required calibration, but overall performance exceeds projections. First batch of soufflé cakes met all quality metrics. The validation of our production capabilities alongside the vindication of our safety standards created a moment of profound satisfaction. Twin confirmations that Sweet Creations had successfully navigated the transition from small artisanal operation to sophisticated manufacturing enterprise. Throughout the day, each production phase was tested, adjusted, and retested until the entire system functioned smoothly. By late afternoon, we had successfully completed test runs of 3 primary products for the Harborview contract, with samples set aside for comprehensive quality evaluation. As the team conducted final cleanup procedures, I retreated to my temporary office at the facility to review the day's documentation. The production metrics, quality assessments, and process adjustments all indicated we were not just ready for the Harborview launch, but positioned to exceed their expectations. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Received notice that settlement has been filed with court. Procedural review underway, but all substantive matters are concluded. Congratulations. The message represented the final administrative step in dissolving my marriage, a process that had begun with shocking betrayal and concluded with decisive resolution. The woman who had stood frozen in her kitchen, devastated by her husband's anniversary day deception, had transformed through crisis into someone stronger, more confident, and ultimately more successful than before. Another notification appeared, an email from a real estate agent I'd contacted regarding downtown properties. Several promising options available. Attached preliminary listings for your review. Available to show properties this weekend if convenient. I scrolled through the attached listings, each representing a fresh start unconnected to my life with Daniel. Contemporary spaces with industrial elements, natural light, and proximity to both the bakery and Maple Street facility. One in particular caught my attention. A renovated loft in a historic building with exposed brick walls, oversized windows, and a rooftop garden area. The antithesis of the traditional suburban home we had shared. As I was considering scheduling a viewing, Megan called. "How did testing go?" she asked immediately. "And what's this I hear about regulatory inspectors showing up?" "Testing exceeded expectations," I reported. And the inspection was clearly Daniel's parting shot. Anonymous complaint about safety violations that were thoroughly disproven. If anything, it strengthened our position by giving us official documentation of our exemplary compliance. Classic backfire, Megan observed with satisfaction. He just cannot accept that you've built something successful without him. It's almost sad, I admitted. Even now, with everything concluded legally, he's still trying to undermine rather than acknowledging he underestimated me. Speaking of acknowledgement, Megan transitioned, have you seen the Business Journal's follow-up piece? They're specifically highlighting Sweet Creations as a case study in entrepreneurial resilience and growth strategy. Already, I thought Olivia said they were planning that for after the facility opening. Apparently, your story was too compelling to wait, Megan explained. The journalist caught wind of the expansion timeline and accelerated the feature. It's actually quite impressive coverage. Focuses entirely on your business strategy and execution. No mention of personal circumstances. The professional recognition, completely separate from the drama of my divorce, represented another milestone in Sweet Creations' evolution and in my own transition from Daniel's underestimated wife to respected business leader in my own right. I'll read it tonight, I promised. Right now, I'm reviewing property listings. I think I found a place I want to see this weekend. That was fast, Megan noted. What kind of place? Downtown loft, completely different from anything I would have chosen when I was with Daniel. It's modern, open, a little industrial, someplace that's entirely mine with no echoes of my previous life. I like the symbolism, Megan approved. New chapter, new space. After finishing at Maple Street, I drove to the bakery to check on retail operations. The storefront had received less of my attention during the expansion process, with Megan overseeing day-to-day management while I focused on the production facility. Walking through the front door as a customer might, I was pleased to note the display cases artfully arranged with seasonal offerings, staff engaging warmly with patrons, and the overall atmosphere reflecting the quality and craftsmanship that had built our reputation. Lisa, our retail manager, greeted me as I moved behind the counter. "Perfect timing," she said. "We just received an interesting inquiry. Westfield Shopping Center's management contacted us about opening a second location in their new gourmet marketplace section. They specifically mentioned the Business Journal coverage as catching their attention. The opportunity wasn't entirely unexpected. We had discussed retail expansion as part of our growth strategy, but the timing was fortuitous, arriving just as our production capacity was increasing dramatically. Send them our standard location requirements and ask for their vendor package, I decided. No commitments yet, but definitely worth exploring. As Lisa made notes, she added, "There's something else you should know. Daniel came by earlier. Today." The information surprised me. Did he say why? He wanted to order something, said he needed to taste the competition. But when I told him we don't serve competitors, he claimed he was joking and left. Seemed off somehow. Not aggressive, just diminished? The description matched what Catherine had hinted about Daniel's state following his professional disgrace and our divorce settlement. The man who had once exuded confidence and control now apparently wandered into the business he had dismissed for years, making awkward attempts at humor that fell flat. If he returns, maintain professional courtesy, but provide no information about the business or me personally, I instructed, and let me know immediately. After reviewing the day's sales reports and discussing upcoming seasonal menu adjustments with Lisa, I finally headed to Megan's apartment, stopping to pick up dinner from a small Mediterranean restaurant nearby. The day's achievements, successful production testing, validation of our safety standards, positive business coverage, potential retail expansion, created a cumulative sense of forward momentum that contrasted sharply with the emotional turbulence of recent months. At Megan's, I found the apartment empty, but a note on the refrigerator explaining she had a last-minute date and would be back later. The unexpected solitude was welcome after an intensely collaborative day, giving me space to decompress and reflect. As I ate dinner at the kitchen island, I opened my laptop to review the Business Journal article Megan had mentioned. The piece was substantive and professionally focused, analyzing Sweet Creations' growth strategy, market positioning, and operational expansion without a single mention of my personal circumstances. Emma Reynolds has engineered a textbook example of strategic scaling, the article noted. Maintaining quality standards while increasing production capacity represents one of the most challenging transitions for artisanal food businesses. Sweet Creations' methodical approach to this challenge, securing anchor clients before expanding, investing in state-of-the-art facilities, and emphasizing quality control throughout, offers valuable lessons for entrepreneurs in similar growth phases. The acknowledgement of my business acumen from a respected publication created a different kind of satisfaction than our legal victory. Validation not just of what I had protected from Daniel's attempted appropriation, but of what I had built, through vision and determination. After dinner, I returned to the real estate listings, examining the downtown loft more carefully. The space represented not just a new home, but a statement about my life moving forward. Independent, contemporary, aligned with my professional identity rather than subsumed within someone else's vision. I scheduled a viewing for Saturday morning, then turned to my email to find a message from Robert Harrington at Harborview Hotels. "Emma, heard about your successful production testing today. Our F&B directors are eager for samples from the first official run. When might we expect those? Also, I've been approached by several journalists regarding our partnership. Apparently, your business growth has attracted significant attention. Happy to coordinate messaging if helpful." The interest from business journalists represented another unexpected benefit of our expansion: increased visibility within the hospitality industry, potentially leading to additional contracts with similar clients. "First official production run scheduled for Monday," I replied. "We'll expedite samples to your team Tuesday via overnight shipping. Regarding media interest, would appreciate coordinating messaging. Our marketing director, Olivia Chen, will contact your communications team tomorrow to align approaches." As I closed my laptop, a text arrived from an unfamiliar number. "Emma, it's Vanessa. Need to speak with you. Professional matter, not personal. Can you call when convenient?" The unexpected contact from Daniel's former assistant and apparent ex-girlfriend triggered immediate wariness. While our previous LinkedIn exchange had been professionally cordial, direct communication outside that platform seemed potentially problematic. After consideration, I replied with deliberate neutrality. Available tomorrow morning. Professional calls between 9:11 a.m. Her response came quickly. Thank you. We'll call at 9:30. Important information regarding Stanton's situation that may affect you indirectly. The cryptic message raised more questions than it answered, but I resolved to maintain boundaries while hearing what she had to share. Whatever important information Vanessa possessed, I would evaluate it objectively without being drawn into Daniel's ongoing professional difficulties. The following morning, I arrived at the bakery early to review weekend production schedules, before Vanessa's call. The retail space was quiet, staff preparing for opening while the kitchen team worked on specialized orders for weekend events. The familiar rhythm of morning preparations, the scent of fresh baking, the precision of pastry assembly, the careful arrangement of display cases, grounded me in the business I had built regardless of personal complications. At precisely 9:30, my phone rang with Vanessa's number. "Emma, thank you for taking my call," she began, her tone professionally formal. "I'll be direct. Stanton Financial is conducting an expanded investigation into Daniel's client activities, and there's concern that some transactions might involve Sweet Creations or your personal accounts." The statement momentarily took my breath away. That's impossible. Sweet Creations has never had any business relationship with Stanton or Daniel professionally. "I understand," Vanessa replied carefully. "And I conveyed that during my interview with their compliance team yesterday. However, they've identified transactions where client funds were temporarily directed to accounts with naming patterns similar to your business before being moved offshore." The implication crystallized immediately. Daniel had potentially used variations of Sweet Creations' name in fraudulent accounts to obscure his financial manipulations, creating a documentary trail that might appear to implicate my business. "This is the first I'm hearing of this," I said, maintaining composure despite the alarm bells ringing internally. "My business has separate banking entirely, documented since inception, with no connection to Stanton or its clients." I believed that was the case, Vanessa confirmed, "which is why I thought you should be aware. The compliance team will likely contact you formally next week, requesting documentation of legitimate Sweet Creations accounts to distinguish them from these other entities." The warning, while concerning, represented an unexpected courtesy from someone I had assumed was aligned with Daniel against me. "May I ask why you're sharing this information? It seems potentially problematic for you to be discussing an ongoing investigation." There was a brief pause before Vanessa answered, her professional tone softening slightly. "I'm starting at Hartford Financial next month. I need a clean break from Stanton and everything associated with it, including Daniel." The implied personal dimension remained tactfully unspoken but clear. Whatever relationship had existed between them had evidently concluded, likely as Daniel's professional circumstances deteriorated. The day before my scheduled court appearance for the final divorce decree, Catherine requested a brief meeting. She informed me that Daniel had been formally charged with financial crimes related to his activities at Stanton, multiple counts of wire fraud, investment advisor fraud, and misappropriation of client funds. "This won't impact your divorce proceedings," Catherine clarified. "The settlement agreement is legally binding regardless of his current legal difficulties. However, you should be prepared for renewed media interest." "What's the likely outcome of these charges?" I asked. "Based on similar cases, if convicted, he's looking at significant financial penalties and potentially 3 to 5 years in federal prison," Catherine replied. "His cooperation and any restitution efforts would factor into sentencing." The following morning, I arrived at the courthouse for our final divorce hearing. Daniel was already seated with his attorney when I entered the courtroom with Catherine. His appearance shocked me momentarily, the impeccable grooming and confident bearing replaced by visible strain. He glanced up briefly as we entered before returning his attention to documents before him. The proceeding itself was brief and procedural. The the judge confirming both parties had signed the settlement agreement willingly, reviewing its basic terms, and formally dissolving the marriage. As we prepared to leave the courtroom, Daniel approached hesitantly. "Emma," he began, his voice lacking its former confident resonance, "I just wanted to say, congratulations on Sweet Creation's success. The expansion is impressive." The acknowledgement, however belated, represented something I had sought for years during our marriage, genuine recognition of what I had built rather than dismissive categorization as a hobby. "Thank you," I replied simply, maintaining polite neutrality. "I should have seen it," he continued despite my evident restraint. "What you were building, its potential." I was so consumed with my own career, my own definition of success, that I missed what was happening right beside me. "Yes," I agreed, the simple confirmation neither accusatory nor emotional. "You should have." Without elaboration, I turned toward the door where Catherine waited, leaving Daniel standing alone in the courtroom that had formalized the end of our marriage. Outside the courthouse, I paused momentarily to acknowledge the milestone. Not just the dissolution of my marriage, but the completion of a journey from betrayed wife to independent business owner, fully embracing her capabilities and vision. My phone buzzed with a message from Megan. "Court done? Team waiting at Maple Street with champagne when you're ready." Before responding to Megan, I took one last look at the courthouse where my marriage had officially ended. Whatever future awaited Daniel was now entirely separate from mine. Our paths had diverged permanently and definitively. I texted Megan. "On my way. Everything finalized. New chapter officially begins today." As I walked toward my car, spring sunshine warm on my face and Sweet Creation's future bright with possibility, I felt neither vindication nor lingering anger, only gratitude for the crisis that had ultimately revealed my own strength, determination, and capacity for success beyond anything I had previously imagined possible. The husband who had planned to discard me with nothing had instead catalyzed the discovery of everything I could be without him. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.